This happened a few months ago, back in the spring, that weird limbo between finishing school and actually starting life. I just graduated early, and instead of feeling proud, I felt hollow. My friends were still drowning in finals, my job didn't start until June, and every day felt like a slow drip of wasted time. So when Mom asked if I could drive down to Delaware to check on my Uncle Rick's beach house, I said yes instantly. It was something to do, a purpose, even if it was just turning faucets and checking locks. The drive was quiet, about 2 hours from Pennsylvania. By the time I reached the neighborhood, the sun had started to melt behind tall beach grass and winding roads. Rick's place stood big and lonely at the end of the street, the kind of house meant for summer laughter and loud family chaos. But that day it looked like it hadn't breathed in months. I let myself in. The air smelled stale, like wood and sea salt that had forgotten how to move. I walked through the halls that usually echoed with board game noise and drunk uncles telling bad jokes. Now all I heard was my own footsteps. The silence felt thick, like the house didn't want me there. I ran through Rick's checklist. No leaks. No damage. Everything perfectly fine. Too fine. It was the kind of stillness that makes you feel watched even when you know you're alone. By dusk I texted Mom, "Everything's good. I'll stay overnight and head back in the morning." She replied with a thumbs up and a reminder to thank Rick. I made myself a quick dinner, scrolled my phone for a while, and decided I'd sleep in the master bedroom, the one I never got to use during family gatherings. It had a king-sized bed, its own bathroom, and a walk-in closet. I brushed my teeth, turned off the lights, and sank into the mattress. For the first time in months I felt relaxed, until the noise woke me up.
It was faint at first, a soft thump. My eyes opened in the dark, heart pounding. Another sound, like something falling inside the closet. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe the AC? The wind? But there was no wind. No hum, no draft, just silence, and then a low creak. The closet door was opening. Even half asleep, I knew that sound, that slow, dragging wooden creak. I tried to move, but my body refused. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't want to. Every cell in my body screamed to stay still. Through barely open eyes, I saw it, a tall shadow stepping out of the closet. Not rushing, not stumbling, just emerging. The faint moonlight from the window hid its outline, human, but wrong somehow. Shoulders too sharp, head tilted like it was studying me. It stood beside the bed, motionless. I could feel it watching me breathe. The air grew heavier, pressing on my chest. 20 seconds, that's all it lasted, but it felt like a lifetime. Then, without a sound, it turned and walked away. I listened to the creaking floorboards. 1 step, 2, then silence. But the silence didn't head downstairs. It went upstairs. That's when my heart truly froze. The 3rd floor didn't have an exit. Whoever, whatever, that was, had cornered itself. I waited, paralyzed, until I could finally move again. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and whispered to the 911 dispatcher, "Someone's in the house." She told me to lock the door and wait for the officers. Minutes crawled by like hours until flashing red and blue lights danced through the windows. I bolted downstairs, opened the door, and nearly collapsed when I saw them. 2 officers rushed inside while I stood on the porch, shivering in the cold night air. They came back after 10 minutes. "House is empty," one said. I just stared at him. Empty? No way. I heard the footsteps. There was nowhere to go. Uncle Rick, furious over the phone, demanded they check again. The cops sighed but agreed. This time they went room by room, closet by closet. I followed them. I needed to see it for myself. That's when one officer called out from upstairs. "Windows open." We all looked up. The 3rd floor window, the one directly above the master bedroom, was unlocked, swinging gently in the wind. The 2nd officer went outside with a flashlight. I followed, keeping a safe distance. He scanned the yard, the deck, then the roofline, and stopped. His beam froze on something. A man. He was crouched on the roof, staring straight at us. His skin was filthy, his head bald, his clothes shredded and greasy. He didn't flinch at the light, didn't even blink. Just stared. For a few seconds none of us moved. Then the officer shouted, "Don't move," and called for backup. They dragged him down an hour later. He didn't fight, didn't talk. Just let them cuff him while keeping that same blank, empty look. The police said he was probably homeless, squatting there for days, maybe weeks. But no one could explain how he got in, or how he managed to live in that house without being noticed. Rick had top-grade locks, security lights, cameras, none of which had caught a thing. When I asked the officers where they found him, one said quietly, "He was sleeping in the attic before tonight. Judging by the footprints, he must have been watching you from the vent above your bed." That sentence never left me. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at that same closet. The next day, Rick replaced every lock, but I know what I saw, and I know what I felt that night. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear that faint creak of the closet door. Because the worst part isn't that he was there. It's that I don't know how long he'd been watching me before I woke up. The darkness is always watching. If you want more stories that send chills down your spine, like, share, and subscribe to Dark Echoes. Stay safe or don't. We'll see you next time. It started out like any ordinary summer weekend. Mike had a beach house on the Jersey Shore, a huge old family property that smelled of salt, wood, and memories. His grandparents had passed recently, and since no one lived there full-time, he used it whenever he wanted. When he invited me down, I jumped at the chance. I needed a break, ocean air, cold beer, and quiet. We reached the house at sunset, tall windows staring over the dunes, floors that groaned under every step, and that faint musty scent of years gone by. The first night was peaceful. We grabbed sandwiches, walked the beach, fished for an hour, and even met a couple of local girls wandering barefoot along the shoreline. Their laughter blended with the wind, making the night feel timeless. Back inside, the house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that hums. I brushed it off. Old houses creak. Salt air plays tricks on your ears. We went to bed around midnight. That was the last moment of peace we'd have. Somewhere in the middle of the night, a piercing beep snapped me awake. One sharp, metallic tone, then another, perfectly spaced. I sat up, heart hammering. It sounded like a smoke alarm, but it was off. Sharper, faster, almost electronic. Mike stumbled out of his room half asleep, muttering, "What the hell is that?" The sound wasn't coming from our floor. It was coming from above. We rushed upstairs to the third floor, a narrow hallway lit only by moonlight seeping through a single window. The beeping grew louder with each step, bouncing off the walls until it felt like the sound was inside our skulls. We opened one bedroom door after another. Nothing. Then, in the last room at the end of the hall, we found it. On the bed lay a small black device. It was about the size of a walkie-talkie, smooth plastic casing, no screen, no buttons, just a blinking red light and a tiny metal switch. The beeping came from it, shrill and unrelenting. Instinctively, I flipped the switch. The sound stopped. For a moment, the silence was deafening. Mike stepped closer, squinting. "What is that thing?" I shook my head. Not a smoke detector. No brand. Nothing. We turned it over, blank on all sides. No ports, no wires. Just that single switch. I felt an unease crawl up my spine. Why was it under a pillow? Mike didn't answer. He just looked at me, pale and confused. We sat there for a few minutes, staring at the object, waiting for something to make sense. Nothing did. The house was locked, we were the only ones with keys, and neither of us had ever seen that thing before. Then the realization hit me. I turned the switch back on. The beeping returned instantly, the same tone, same rhythm. I switched it off. Silence. "There's no timer," I whispered. "No motion sensor." Mike's eyes widened. "So how did it turn on?" The question hung in the air like smoke. And then we both understood. The only way that device could have started beeping was if someone had flipped it. We looked at each other, our fear reflected in the other's face. I ran to the window, still locked from the inside. Doors too. No sign of a break-in. Mike grabbed his phone with shaking hands and called 911. I pushed his dresser against the bedroom door and turned off the lights. We sat there, whispering, straining to hear anything beyond the pounding of our hearts. At first there was nothing. Then came a faint sound, a drag across the floor above us. Slow, deliberate. "Mike." He nodded, phone pressed to his ear. "They're coming. Just stay quiet." Minutes felt like hours. Then flashing lights flooded the yard. Relief washed through me like oxygen. The police stormed the house, shouting commands. We ran downstairs to meet them, voices trembling as we explained everything. After 10 long minutes, an officer re-emerged from the stairwell. His expression told me enough. Something was wrong. "You're sure you didn't open those windows?" he asked. "What windows?" Mike said. "All of them," the officer replied. "Every window on the 3rd floor is wide open. Curtains torn. Drawers pulled out. Looks like someone went through the rooms, fast." We followed them up. The hallway looked like a hurricane had ripped through it. The room where we'd found the device was flipped inside out. Mattress on the floor, clothes everywhere, walls scratched. I just stood there numb. It wasn't like this before. We were just here. The officers swept the property. No footprints outside. No fingerprints on the device. No forced entry. It was as if whoever, or whatever, had been there simply evaporated. They told us to lock the house and leave first thing in the morning. We didn't argue. We tried to sleep on the couch downstairs, but every tiny sound, every gust of wind, made us flinch. The image of that black device blinking in the dark burned behind my eyelids. At dawn, we packed and left without breakfast. Later that week, Mike called one of his uncles who'd handled estate maintenance. He swore he'd never left any kind of electronics in the house, and when he checked the attic, he found something else. Dozens of small black devices identical to the one we found, stacked neatly in a box. None of them powered on. None had serial numbers. They called the police again, but even they couldn't explain it. No one could. Now, months later, I sometimes wake up to the memory of that sound, sharp, metallic, impossible to ignore. For a split second, I'm back in that room, watching the red light blink in the dark, wondering who had been standing there, inches from us, flipping that switch. Maybe they never left the house at all. Maybe they're still out there, testing another device, waiting for the next night someone decides to stay. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway, 4 friends, 1 private beach house, and a few days away from real life. Lindsay had invited me, along with Sabrina and Thea, to her family's beach house. Her parents were wealthy neurosurgeons, and the place was like something out of a magazine. Glass walls, quiet waves, and that eerie kind of calm money buys. I wasn't the party type. My weekends usually meant books, gym, and early nights. But I needed this break. A small escape. The house stood alone on the shoreline, far from the tourist noise. When we arrived, the sun was melting into the sea, painting the house in gold and shadow. The 4 of us dropped our bags, laughed, explored every corner like kids again. It felt safe, too safe. That first night, we sat on the sand with cans of White Claw, music humming softly from a speaker, the waves whispering just loud enough to drown our thoughts. Then Thea noticed it, a faint flicker of light far down the beach. It blinked, then swung, like a flashlight being waved. At first, we thought nothing of it. Maybe other vacationers. But the light got closer, slow and steady, accompanied by laughter, men's laughter. 3 guys around our age approached, barefoot, holding beers, faces hidden by the dark. One of them called out a casual, "Hey, mind if we join?" Lindsay smiled politely. Thea grinned wide. Of course she did. She was always drawn to danger disguised as charm. Soon they were sitting with us, telling stories, laughing. Nothing seemed off. Until it got late. Too late. When they invited us back to their place to keep the night going, I hesitated. My gut twisted. But Thea and Sabrina were already on their feet, giggling. Lindsay hesitated for a moment, then gave in. I didn't. Something in me whispered no. "I'm tired," I said. "You guys go ahead." They waved me off with drunken smiles and walked away with the men, into the dark. I went back to the house alone. The waves behind me sounded heavier now. I had barely drifted into sleep when my phone buzzed violently beside me. The screen flashed, "Lindsay, FaceTime." When I answered, her face was wild with panic, eyes wide, mouth trembling. "Thea and Sabrina, they took them," she screamed. "Get my car. Now." My blood turned to ice. What? What are you?" "Call the police," she cut me off, voice cracking. "I'm hiding near the dunes. They threw them in the back of a black SUV. Please hurry. I jumped out of bed, barely remembering to grab the keys. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped them. Within seconds, I was in her car, tearing down the quiet road that hugged the beach. The night felt endless, empty. No headlights, no sounds except the ocean roaring somewhere behind the houses. Lindsay stayed on the call, whispering directions. 10 houses down. Left side. Black SUV. Hurry. And then I saw it, the faint red taillights of a car crawling slowly through the fog ahead. I hung up on Lindsay and called the police, whispering to the dispatcher like my life depended on silence. She told me to keep distance, to follow until the officers arrived. I trailed the SUV, my heart thudding so loudly I could barely hear the engine. Every turn of its tires felt like a countdown. Then up ahead, flashing blue lights. Relief and terror hit all at once. The SUV stopped. Officers surrounded it instantly, guns drawn. What happened next felt like a movie playing too fast. Doors ripped open. Men dragged out, yelling. And then the trunk. An officer opened it slowly. Inside were Thea and Sabrina. Bound. Gagged. Shaking. They were alive, but barely conscious. Everything blurred after that. I remember the screams, the flashing lights, Lindsay sobbing when she ran into my arms. The men weren't locals. The house they'd been staying in wasn't even theirs. It belonged to an elderly couple vacationing abroad. They had broken in days earlier, waiting for someone like us. They planned it. The trial came and went in silence. Lindsay's parents and Thea's lawyer parents made sure of that. The men were sentenced for kidnapping, assault, and trespassing. But justice never feels like enough when you've seen that kind of evil. Months later, I still wake up to that flashlight swinging in the dark, that first warning sign we ignored. We don't talk about that night anymore. Lindsay sold the house. Thea moved across the country. Sabrina refuses to go near the ocean. As for me, I can't stand the sound of waves at night. Because when it's quiet enough, I swear I can still hear that same laughter. Faint, drifting through the wind. The darkness is always watching. If you want more stories that send chills down your spine, like, share and subscribe to Dark Echoes. Stay safe or don't. We'll see you next time.